Good evening, everyone. I want to welcome you to tonight's webinar, Vital Information and Tips for Taking the DAT, and it's presented by the American Dental Association, and this is part of ASDA's DAT Week. Tonight's program is going to provide you information on the exam, the registration process, as well as some tips for studying and answers to the most frequently asked questions. So after we get through the presentation, then we'll open up the webinar to your questions. So as far as asking questions, you'll see that on the right-hand side, there is a control panel, and you are able to type your question right into there. So we will we'll answer the questions in the order that they're submitted. And if we don't get to your question, we'll provide both of our emails that you can always email us later if you need an answer. So before we get started, just a couple housekeeping items. So all attendees are muted so that we don't pick up any background noise. This webinar will be recorded and it's going to be posted on ASDA's website, and also everybody that registered for the webinar. So even if you have friends that registered and aren't able to attend, they will get an email with the recording, so they'll be able to watch it later. So I'm Danielle Bauer, and I am ASDA's Director of Membership, and I'm also going to be the facilitator for tonight's program. I am one of the ASDA staff. I've been with ASDA for nearly 10 years, and my focus is on creating and managing initiatives to increase membership and involvement in ASDA. Our presenter tonight is Nicholas Husong, and he is the Manager of Test Administration within the Department of Testing Services at the American Dental Association. The Department of Testing Services is responsible for administering over 43,000 tests per year across 6 different testing platforms. The Test Administration Unit is responsible for processing applications and score requests, providing information to candidates, and ensuring smooth test delivery. Nicholas has been with the American Dental Association for 10 years and has been the Manager of Test Administration for the past 4 years. All right, so Nicholas, I am going to turn the presenter over to you so you can get us started. And you should see something. There we go. We can see your screen.
Outstanding. All right. Thank you, Danielle. As she said, I am Nick Husong. I'm the Manager of Test Administration for the American Dental Association, and I've been giving this presentation for a few years now during the DAT week to just give a sense of the knowledge that I've picked up over the years as manager. And most of this is gleaned either from talking to staff at ASDA or at DIA, but a lot of it has just come from interacting with the people who take the test. So by all means, after you get through the DAT experience, if you have any insights that you would like to share, be sure to shoot me an email. I'm going to first go through a little bit about the history of the test, and then after that, I will just walk through how the process works, starting with how you apply for the test, going through preparing for the test, and then actually taking it at the test center. So the development of the DAT began in 1945. It was at the request of the dental schools because they were seeing a troubling rate of attrition of their students. As you can see there, 20 to 25% of first-year dental students did not end up graduating from dental school, which is a really high rate of attrition. Essentially, 1 in 4 people that were enrolled into dental school did not end up graduating, and that was due to a number of factors, among them that people were returning from World War II, using the GI Bill funds to go back to school, but at that point their college transcripts and their GPA, that sort of thing, might be 5 or 6 years out of date, did not prove a particularly useful tool for predicting their performance in dental school. So the dental schools requested that the American Dental Association develop an admission test, which we did. It began to be administered in the late 40s. The test has changed quite a bit over the 70 years since then. There was originally a number of sections on the test that are no longer there. There was a vocabulary section similar to the sort of thing that you would see on the GRE now. There was also a chalk carving test and spatial relations test that were on the DAT. When I first started at the American Dental Association, the director of the Department of Testing Services was a dentist, and he had taken the DAT during that time, and it happened to him twice that he did the chalk carving, and then they had to mail it from the test center to the American Dental Association headquarters for scoring, and his actually shattered while it was in the mail and could not be scored, so he had to redo it. And it happened again. So he actually had to do the chalk carving 3 times. This is all to say you should be grateful that this is all on a computer and we don't have to do anything by mail anymore. In 1972, both of those tests, the chalk carving and spatial relations, were replaced by perceptual motor ability, which is now just the perceptual ability test. As you can see at the bottom, the score scale has also changed. You actually used to be able to get a negative score on the DAT, which I imagine had to prove pretty demoralizing. But in 1988, it was changed from the -1 to 9 scale to the current 1 to 30. And I know it's not uncommon for people entering dental school to have parents who went to dental school. So if you are someone whose parents are also dentists and they are willing to bet you that they got a higher score on the DAT than you will, you should take that bet, because their scores are going to look really bad if they tested before 1988 compared to the scores on the scale from 1 to 30. So the purpose of the test is to measure the general academic ability, especially the comprehension of scientific information and perceptual ability, which the dental schools tell us are the key determinants to whether or not someone is going to succeed in dental school. The purpose of the test is what builds the foundation upon which we design it, and that is what determines the content of the test, as well as the rules and regulations that we put in place, as well as how we report the scores, as well as the types of questions that we administer. And since the 40s, when the test was rolled out, all the validity studies that we have done, and we continue to do them, there's an annual validity study that is done, show that scores on the DAT, as well as other materials on your dental school application, can be fairly predictive of how well someone will do in dental school. That is to say, the higher someone scores on the DAT, there is a correlation to how they will perform in dental school. And because of that, by this point, all dental schools require examinees to take the DAT. This is not to say that the DAT is the sole determining factor in whether or not someone gets into dental school, but it is something that is certainly considered strongly. Not all dental schools, it took quite some time for the dental schools all to adopt the DAT as part of their admission criteria. It was actually within my time, within the last 10 years, that the last 2 dental schools that did not use the DAT started requiring it as part of their admissions process. The process for taking the DAT from your perspective is going to begin with getting a dent pin. And the dent pin is an 8-digit number that will follow you through the DAT, through your dental admission test. It's also used on the ADSAS application, and then it will also be what you use when you get into dental school and end up taking the Part 1 to Part 2 to get licensed. And so the website is ada.org/dentpin. And if you have not already done so, you will need to register for a dent pin before you can submit your application to take the test. On this page, as you can see at left, you can also update any information that you would need to, your email address, your mailing address, even though we don't send you anything by mail email, your phone number, any contact information. If you have to change anything like your name or your birthday, if you accidentally enter your birthday incorrectly, that you can't do online. You will have to send us an email, but all of that information can be found on the DENPIN website. Once you have the DENPIN, the next stop for you should be the dental admission test website itself, ada.org/DAT, where you can apply to take the test, but it also houses one of the most important pieces of material for you before you take the test, the DAT guide, which contains a more in-depth walkthrough of the entire process than you will get here, but it is similar information, as well as all of the rules and regulations that you will be required to follow when you take the test. If there is one mistake that people make when taking the dental admission test that I could impart to you in all my time at the ADA, it is that they do not read the DAT guide before going to take the test. And I don't consider any of the rules to be outlandish or bizarre, but we do get it pretty frequently that people violate a rule and are surprised to have done so. And the penalties can be pretty stiff. You can get your scores voided and be barred from retaking the test for a set amount of time. So I will go into some of those rules later, but for now I would just like to impart, please read the DAT guide. Ignorance of the rules that we have in place is not an excuse for breaking. You can also find all of the materials that we offer related to the test on this site. We will have a link to presentations like this one, as well as presentations that we've given in the past elsewhere, as well as any reference texts that we have. Any of the materials that we offer related to the DAT are all going to be on that page. Once you submit the application, generally it will be processed within 1 to 2 business days. You get a 6-month window of eligibility from the day the application is processed. If it is your first time taking the test, it is not enough to schedule a test during that 6 months. You have to schedule and take the test. That is to say, 4 months after you apply, you cannot schedule a test for 4 months after that. You have to have taken the test within 6 months of when your application is processed. So if you applied today, that would mean you would have to test by likely October 18th if we process the application tomorrow. If there are extenuating circumstances that prohibit you from being able to test during that period, we are flexible. Generally, we will make exceptions if there is, say, a family or a medical emergency that makes it so that you could not test during the 6 months. We understand and in fact ask you to submit your application to take the test well in advance of when you're trying to test. So you may apply today intending to take the test in August. And if something comes up in August right before you intended to take the test, we understand that you then may not be able to take it before your application expired in October. So you would just need to send us in information about what happened, and we will work with you to get the test scheduled. The test is administered nationwide, actually in the United States and Canada, at Prometric test centers. Last year there were 291 of those centers with around 6,000 available seats. So if you apply far enough in advance, you should not have much trouble getting your desired test date at your desired test center. I recommend, if you have a specific time in mind when you are trying to take the test, that you apply at least 3 months in advance of that. If you just have a general idea of when you want to take the test, say you're going to test in July, but it doesn't really matter to you when, then you may be able to wait to submit your application 8 to 10 weeks in advance of when you are trying to take the test. We use Prometric test centers, and we use the top level of test centers, the professional level testing centers, because they offer the highest amount of test security for us, and that includes video monitoring and biometric check-in. So they will take fingerprints when you show up, as well as taking your picture and checking your IDs to make sure that you are who you say you are when you show up there. Any information that you would like to get about the process of checking in at the test center or interacting with Prometric can be found on their website, which is prometric.com. Currently, the fee for taking the test is $460. That fee includes both the test and the unofficial copy of the scores that you receive at the test center. When you submit the application to take the test, you will come to a page where it lists all of the American and Canadian dental schools that are accredited by CODA. They will automatically all be selected to receive your scores. It is my strong recommendation that you leave it that way, that when you apply to take the test, you mark every single school to receive your scores, because it is free for you to do so. If you have to add schools later, it is $37 per school, as indicated below the fee for the test. And there's really no reason not to. I have heard from people that they want to take the test to see how they will do before they determine which schools they're going to submit their applications to, or whether or not they have to retake the test. But from my perspective, if you don't score as highly as you want to, and you decide to retake the test, well, when you send those scores, they're going to see the previous set of scores no matter what. So there's really, to my thinking, no point in waiting for a retest before sending your scores. In addition, if you take the test and then don't apply to most of the schools that you marked on to receive your scores, they probably won't know that they received your scores, because if you don't apply, they will likely not have any reason to look. So I do recommend that you just leave it as is on the application. All schools will be marked to receive your scores. Just leave it that way. There is an audit request. If you take the test and you do not score as highly as you think you should have, you can request within 30 days of your test to have us perform an audit where we will go through and make sure that the test was scored correctly. It is something that we make available because a lot of students asked for it, and there was no reason for us not to offer that as a service. I do not recommend doing it unless you have a very compelling reason to believe that there was something wrong with your scores. In my time at the Dental Association, an audit has not changed anyone's scores on the computerized test. It was a little bit different when we used to do paper and pencil, because there could be issues if someone tried to erase an answer and mark a different answer. The Scantron may not have scored that item correctly, but with the computerized test, I have not seen an audit change anyone's scores. This is not to say that they will not change yours. I would just say, unless you have a compelling reason to believe that your scores would change, that you should not ask us to perform an audit. This is the current schedule for the test. I will go into it a little bit more later, but there is a detailed breakdown of the test specifications in the DAT guide. It goes through every section on the test and lists the specific subjects that are covered within that section, as well as how many questions there are in each of those areas. I strongly recommend that you use that as the basis for determining your study plan, but we will get into that a little bit later. As you can see, the first section of the test is the survey of the natural sciences, bio, gen chem, and organic chem. There is 90 minutes for that section, and you'll be asked to complete 100 questions in that time. Next is the perceptual ability, which is 60 minutes, and there'll be 90 questions. Then you get your optional lunch break. And then there's 50 questions over 60 minutes in the reading comprehension, usually about 3 or 4 passages in there. And then quantitative reasoning is 40 questions in 45 minutes. And then you will be presented with an optional post-test survey. I think a lot of students have the idea that there's no point in filling out the survey because we don't look at the information that comes in, but I can assure you that we do. So if you have any feedback you'd like to give us on the test, you can enter it there and we will review it. And so the total testing time is 5 hours and 15 minutes. And that is if you test with standard time. We do offer testing accommodations for people who can provide us with documentation of a disability. And as it says here, according to the Americans with Disabilities Act, a disability is a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activities. And that doesn't need to be severe, I would say, because thinking does count as a major life activity. So obviously for things like ADHD, generalized anxiety, we do offer accommodations for that if you can provide the correct supporting documentation. We also offer not just extended time, but I find that it benefits a lot of people to take the test on more than one day, which is also an accommodation that is available if the documentation supports it. A lot of people, if they have problems with attention, providing extra time on the test doesn't help. If you get worse at concentrating the longer you take the test, it does not make sense for you to take the test for a longer amount of time. It makes sense for the test to be split over multiple days so that you can take it with less time, but take the first two sections one day and the reading comprehension and quantitative reasoning on a subsequent day. So there is not necessarily set accommodations that we offer, but whatever it is that will help you, if we can provide it, and you can provide documentation that it is what you need to take the test accurately, then we will work on providing it for you. Any information that you want about accommodations or to submit your request, you can email that to testingaccommodations@ada.org. The form itself that you have to fill out goes into a lot more detail on what we expect and what you can expect when requesting accommodations. The one thing to be aware of is if you mark on the application that you are requesting accommodations, your application will not be processed until those accommodations are approved. That is, using the example I used earlier, if you applied tonight right after this webinar and you marked that you were requesting testing accommodations, your application would not get processed tomorrow. It would be held until we received your accommodations request form as well as the necessary supporting documentation. And then your 6-month window of eligibility would start from the day we processed the application with accommodations, not from the day after you processed. So if you apply today and it takes a week for us to process your accommodations, your 6 months would start on the 24th. So I think this is really why most people sign up to take this webinar. And now I will get into the study tips that I have gleaned over the years of interacting with students, with the disclaimers that I offer on this page. We do not endorse any third-party study materials or courses. That's because the materials that they provide were not received from us and they may not be accurate. We have run into issues in the past where students were given tips for taking the test from a third-party company that were inaccurate and were actually in violation of some of our testing rules. That became a pretty thorny issue for both the people taking the test as well as us. So I do not want to dissuade you from working with any of the third-party study materials or courses, as they can certainly be helpful. Just make sure that any information that they give you, that you go to our website on the DAT guide and make sure that the information you received was accurate so that you do not run into any trouble on testing. And if there's anything you hear in any of the study courses or any of the books you get to help you take the test, You can email, call us, live chat to make sure that it is accurate. We'd be happy to help. The ADA offers practice tests to help students familiarize themselves with the test format. That is to give you a sense of how you move through the test, what the questions look like, and things like that. It is not necessarily intended as an in-depth study tool. It is only intended to help familiarize you with the test itself. We expect your primary source of studying to be your course textbooks and course notes. There are new practice tests that have been recently released. I will get into that a little bit later. And though I consider them a pretty significant improvement over the practice tests that we offered in years past, they are still designed only to familiarize you with the test itself, not to help you gauge how you're going to perform on the test, and certainly not as something to treat as a dedicated study guide. At the bottom, I think that is the most important. Neither I nor anyone else can give you a sort of silver bullet to getting a good score on the DAT. The test is designed to be an accurate measure of your abilities in the area that it measures. And from all indications we have, it is. So I cannot tell you how to get a higher score on the test. I can tell you what has helped people perform to the best of their abilities in the past. But at a certain point, in order to get a better score on the test, you would have to actually improve your abilities. I will get into that a little bit later. But I think the biggest tip that I can give is to do everything you need to do to study for the test, to make sure that you are comfortable when you walk in to the Prometric Test Center to take the test, that you're not feeling like there was more you could have done, that you don't feel like you don't know how things are going to go, that you're familiar with the test, that you're familiar with the rules, that you're confident and relaxed. I think that anxiety about those things can really prove to be a detriment to people when they take the DAT. So as I said, the ADA has released a new version of the practice test versus what was available in years past. You can take either the full practice test as it is described here. It is $100 and it covers all 6 sections on the test. It is not a full version of the test. That is, it is not 280 questions. It is not 5 hours and 15 minutes long. The sections contain less questions, but it is timed correctly. So whatever proportion of questions are removed, that amount of time is also removed. So you can get a sense going through there of how quickly you need to move through the questions on the test itself. You can also, if you feel like there are areas where you are weaker than others, if you say felt like you are really strong in reading comprehension and quantitative reasoning, but that you're not as strong in organic chem, then you can take specifically the organic chemistry section of the practice test. The modules are all $20 a piece. I think probably that is going to be most helpful when it comes to some of the individual science sections or the perceptual ability. As you're all aware, there's not really courses that you take in perceptual ability. And the only way to really study for those items is to look at the sorts of items that are going to be on the test. There are not scores given for any of this. You are given the opportunity to see which questions you got wrong and what the correct answer was on those specific questions, but we don't give you a score. Again, these are not designed to give you a sense of how well you're going to do on the test. I think that is a problem that a lot of people fall into, that they take practice tests where you're given a score, and then they think that that is the score they're going to get when they actually show up at the test center. The scoring of the test is fairly complicated, and as I said previously, no one who is offering you a practice test that provides a score was told how to score the DAT by anyone at the American Dental Association. So I hear fairly often from students who take the test that they performed much better on practice tests than they did on the actual DAT. And as I said, the issue is that there is no way for them to score a practice DAT the way the actual DAT is scored. So I would not put much stock in how well you do on scored practice tests. I would just use those to gauge how comfortable you feel moving through the sort of material that is going to be on the test.
Nick, one quick question, because I've seen a few people post this question. Are the practice tests, are they online? Are they paper? Both?
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention that. It is all computerized. These practice tests are all computerized. There are sample questions that are available in paper format that are also on the DAT website, and those are free. But the practice test and the individual modules that are described here, it is all taken on the computer. It is designed to look like the test is going to look when you show up at the test center. It's designed to be timed that way. So yeah, it is all computerized. It is not available by paper.
Thank you.
Yep. Okay, so this is my overall recommendation for how you prepare yourself for the DAT. Number one, I suggest that you review the test specifications and really be honest with yourself about identifying your areas of strength and weakness. Like I said, in the DAT guide, it goes into, it is really in depth about what is going to be covered on the test. We're not trying to trick you. There should not be any surprises for you on test day. We're very upfront about the sort of things you're going to see. It is easy to familiarize yourself with what you need to know for the test. Once you've identified your areas of strength and weakness, I think you should consult with your faculty or any pre-health advisors that you may have at your school to get any recommendations from them. And then you really have to make a plan that you can stick to. I think this is probably the area where the third-party test prep courses come in the most handy, where they do best. If you are the type of person who has trouble organizing such a big effort as studying for the DAT, it can be really helpful to go to a company that just gives you a syllabus and a schedule and tells you what you need to be studying and when you need to be studying. If I was taking the DAT, I certainly would have gone that route, but if you are someone who is able to organize and set up a schedule that you know you will follow, then you can probably study for the DAT on your own. The important thing, I think, is to allow yourself enough time and to be honest with yourself about what you're going to do with that time. In talking to students, I think the average amount of time that they allowed themselves to study for the DAT is 8 to 12 weeks, depending on how much they felt like they needed to study and how much time they were going to spend studying each day. If you set up a schedule and you feel like you're going to need to study for 300 hours before taking the DAT, and you set up a schedule that has you studying 7 days a week for 6 hours a day, then you can do a shorter amount of weeks, but you have to determine whether you're actually going to do that. If you start skipping days or if you don't study as much on any given day as you said you were going to, then your schedule is not really helpful. So if you know that you're only going to study 5 days a week for 4 hours a day, set up a schedule that reflects that. I think that people can get themselves backed up and then become anxious if you're trying to cram in the 5 days before you take the DAT because you didn't stick to the schedule that you set up. So if you are worried about that, like I said, the third-party study courses may be a worthwhile avenue for you to pursue. Because like I said, they give you a syllabus and a schedule that you do not have to come up with yourself. The next two go hand in hand. that you should know the rules and be fully prepared, not just the rules for taking the test, but rules about how scores are going to be reported, rules about what you can and can't do at the test center, know what to expect when you show up. We always recommend that you show up to the test center a half hour before your test is scheduled to begin, so that if there's any delays in getting you checked in, that you still get to start your test on time. Anything like that, just so that you are comfortable when you show up to the test center, and you know that you've got it, that you have done everything you can do to be prepared. If you do find that you have to retake the test because you did not like the score that you got, I really recommend not doing more of the same. It happens fairly often that I see someone who has taken the test multiple times, 2 or 3 times, sometimes more, and they get really the same scores over and over again. Like I said, the test is designed to be an accurate measure of your abilities in the area that it assesses, and we find that it is. That if you do the exact same thing to prepare, only you do more of it, it's not really going to change anything. If you got a lower quantitative reasoning score than you would like, and you felt fully prepared for the test, essentially what you have to do is get better at math. If you got a lower reading comprehension score than you were expecting, similarly, you need to get better at reading comprehension. Find different ways to approach math problems, reading comprehension problems, the perceptual ability. You've got to find something different to do if you want to change your score, especially if you're looking to raise your score by 2 or 3 points. You're really going to have to do something differently, unless when you took the test, you felt drastically underprepared for a specific section. Just studying more is not going to be enough. And the bottom one, I think, is key and goes back to what I was saying in Make a Plan. Really give yourself enough time. Like I said, I recommend, and it's not a bad idea, to submit your application to take the DAT 4 months before you actually intend to do so. You can schedule a test date 4 months in advance, and then know that you've given yourself plenty of time to study for the test. Like I said, even if at that point, even if you're doing the 12 weeks of studying, you've got more than enough time to do that. This is what the test specifications look like in the DAT guide. As I said, it is very in-depth. If it is not listed in the test specifications, you will not see it on the test. But it can go the other way, where if you see it in the test specifications, you may not get any questions about that particular subject on the test. But I can guarantee you that if it is not in the test specifications that are listed in the DAT guide, you will not see questions about it on the test itself. So please do go through here and look at all of the things that are covered. Use that as the basis for your individual test preparation. Some of the other resources that we make available, there are sample test items. As I said, it's a PDF that is posted on the DAT website. They are free. They are older than the questions on the practice test, but they are questions that were actually on the DAT in years past. It is not a full version of the test, but it is questions that were on the test, and it gives you the correct answers. So that is certainly something you can use to familiarize yourself with the sort of questions you're going to see on the test. There is also a tutorial that Prometric offers that is just like the tutorial you will see at the test center the day you actually go take the test. It just walks you through how things will function on the computer, how to move through the questions, how to mark them for review, how to go through the review screen, things like that. And then there are a list of reference texts. They are not necessarily the textbooks that the questions came from, but they are textbooks that the people who put the questions together recommend that you study from. So we surveyed the test constructors who put together all of the questions in the different subject areas. And so if you are needing help in identifying what books to study for, say, organic chem, we asked the test constructors who put together the organic chemistry questions, and they are listed in the list of reference texts. Again, that's all on the ada.org/DAT. To give you a sense of when people take the test, obviously summer is our highest volume. That is part of why we do webinars and things like that now, so that we catch you before the heavy volume season and actually taking the test. So in that way, if you are getting ready to apply or have already submitted your application to take the test, you are more or less right on schedule. Prometric allows you to do last-minute rescheduling up to 24 hours before your test, but it has to be a business day before. So if you're scheduled on a Monday, you can't reschedule on a Sunday. You have to reschedule the preceding Friday. There is a fee, and the fee increases the closer you are to your test date. So this goes back to what I said about making a plan. Make sure that when you're scheduling a date, that date works for you. It is not necessarily a bad thing to reschedule, but it does cost you money, and anything you can do to save yourself the hassle and the money of rescheduling, it is a good thing. So, especially if you're doing it the week before. All this said, if something comes up, say you get in a car accident on the way to take your test, that is something that you would not necessarily have to pay to reschedule. You would just have to get in touch with us for Prometric, and we can help you get that test rescheduled. If you have an appointment and you just oversleep and you do not show up on time to take your test, or do not show up at all to take your test, that counts as a no-show. The fee you paid for the test is gone, and you will have to submit a new application and a new payment in order to be able to take the test. And as I am saying that to you, I am sure you are all thinking that it's ridiculous that anyone would schedule a test and then not go. But I included the numbers of how many people do that every year, or did it last year, and they are shockingly high. So I would say just make sure that your test appointment fits with your schedule. Make sure that you have set up as many reminders as you need to know when you are going to take the test, and avoid having to lose your entire testing fee or to pay a high amount to reschedule. So as I said, it happens a lot that people have to reschedule, about 9,000, and we have a little under 14,000 people who take the test. So assuming that there aren't a lot of people who reschedule multiple times, that means most people who take the test end up having to reschedule it at some point. So as I said, something to keep in mind when you are setting your original testing date. And these are the no-shows that I mentioned. So about 800 people in 2017 had an appointment that they did not show up for, and that they did not notify us that there was any emergency that prohibited them from being able to take the test. So these are all people that, assuming they were still applying to dental school, had to submit a new application and a new payment to take the test. So I say that because I've talked to many people who, when I bring up the no-shows, say that that's not something that they are worried about. Perhaps you should be cognizant of it, even if you're not worried. So this is the slide that I put together of things to keep in mind when you show up at the the test center. We used to have a real problem that is not as big a deal in my experience anymore, but I leave it on here, that people were not showing up with IDs that matched the information they had given us on their dent pin, that the name was different and was different enough that they were not allowed to test. That has not been happening as much recently, but I still include it here. So you do need to bring a primary ID that is government issued and has your picture, name, and signature. Generally, people use a driver's license, a state ID, or a passport, and it has to be current. It cannot be expired. You also have to bring a secondary ID that just needs to have your name and your signature on it. It does not need a photograph. It does not need to be government issued. It can be anything from a social security card to a library card, as long as it has your name and your signature on it. Generally, you will be able to use it for the secondary ID, as long as it is not expired. In the upper right is probably the biggest issue that I find people running into in terms of violating the test rules, that during an unscheduled break, they go to their locker and get something out of it. And usually it is something to eat very quickly or something to drink. But that is a violation of the testing rules. And generally, if you access your locker, we can use the video footage from the test to tell what you were doing. You know, if we see that you went to your locker and you got out some trail mix and ate some trail mix and then went right back into the test center, that's not going to be a problem. But if we cannot tell what you are doing, if it's not clearly visible to us on the video, if we cannot explicitly see that you were not accessing your cell phone or test notes or a textbook, then your scores could be voided and you could be prohibited from retaking the test for up to 2 years. So just be aware that you cannot access your locker on an unscheduled break. There is the 30-minute break that you get between quantitative or the perceptual ability and the reading comprehension. You can access your locker during that time and do really anything you'd like during that time. But if you have to get up and go to the bathroom or something like that while there is test content on the screen, you cannot access your locker. You absolutely cannot access a cell phone. So please be aware of that. In the bottom right, this is something that also comes up fairly frequently. If something happens during your test, let's say the power goes out at your test center and the power is down for 15 or 20 minutes, and when the power comes back up, you find that you lost 5 minutes off of your test time. Well, the test center will make a report of that to us. If you report to them that you lost 5 minutes, the test center will make a report and they will send it in to us, and we will have it for our records. But that is not enough. You have to contact us to let us know what you want us to do about it. So within 5 business days, within about a week after you take the test, you have to email into testingproblems@ada.org. Let us know what happened and let us know what you would like us to do about it. Usually in cases like that, you're going to be asking to retake the test. And if we can confirm that there was an issue that affected your ability to take the test, we will generally grant a retest and help you to get that set up as soon as possible. In addition, do not assume that we will be able to tell something was wrong with the test after the fact. If anything is going wrong, if the mouse is acting funny, if it's taking too long to move between questions, anything that comes up, stop testing, bring it to the attention of the test center administrators, make sure they know about it, ask them to confirm that it is happening so that they can make a report to us. Let's say there's a lag, and when you ask it to move to the next question, it takes 20 seconds to do that, and the whole time that time is coming off the clock. Ask the test center administrator to watch that happen on your screen so that they can make a detailed report to us, and we can easily confirm what it is that you are telling us happened. I'm not trying to scare you. This does not happen frequently, but when it does, we want to make sure that we can get it figured out for you as soon as possible, so that if you have to retake the test, that you can do so within the time frame that you need to. You get an unofficial score report as soon as you finish the test. It tells you how you did, and then you are provided with an unofficial score report. After that, we automatically audit the scores for accuracy. This is another reason that I don't encourage people to seek to have their scores audited if they don't feel they did as well as they should have. We do audit the scores after the test is taken. That is why it takes 3 to 4 weeks after you test for the official scores to be released. We do not send official scores to you. They will be posted on the My Account page, which you can access by going to either the DAT site or the DAT page. You can log into My Account. It will show you your official scores. They will almost certainly be the same as your unofficial scores. If there was any change that we uncovered during the audit process, you would certainly have been notified. We would have sent an email or given you a call, probably both, to let you know that the scores had changed. So the scoring of the test is based on the number of correct answers that you provided. Those correct answers are converted to scale scores. That all means that there is no harm in guessing. If you don't know the answer to a question, it is better to give an answer than to leave it blank. At the end of every section, if you try to exit and there are blank answers, the test will tell you that there are blanks and ask you if you are sure you want to exit. You should not do so. If there are blank questions, go back and mark some answer. Some tests are more difficult than other tests, so if you are talking to other people about your test and they say that it was pretty easy for them and you thought yours was pretty hard, we do equate those two scores. So if someone gets a test where the questions are easier, they would have to get more questions correct to get a higher score. If a test is more difficult, they would need less questions correct to get a higher score. There is a committee that reviews the performance trends on the test. The test is not really graded on a curve, but we do monitor how well people perform in order to set the average. So as it says here, there's no passing or failing. We just consider a score of 18 to be average, so anything above 18 is above average. Obviously, anything below 18 is considered to be below average. If we start to see the average scores sliding too far in one direction, if we see more people getting closer to a 19 or people getting closer to a 17, the scoring of the test is recalibrated so that an average score today equates to an average score 5 years ago, that it equates to what will be an average score 5 years from now. If you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of how the test is scored, there is a very long and in-depth technical document we make available called the DAT User's Manual. You are welcome to access it, and inevitably, if you have any questions, you can email them to us and we will forward it to our psychometricians, and they can answer it. If you do decide that you need to retake the test, we do require that you wait 90 days between test attempts. If you have tested 3 or more times, you have to ask for permission to take the test again. Essentially, you have to provide us proof that you are actively applying to dental schools, and that is the acceptable form of evidence to request the ability to retest after you've taken it 3 times. Once you've taken it 4 times, you are not allowed to take it every 90 days. You have to wait 12 months. So essentially, you can test once per year once you have taken it 4 times. A common question that I have been getting a lot recently is whether or not it looks bad to take the test more than once, whether schools look at it unfavorably. And so I went into our system and pulled out numbers of dental students who are taking the Part 1 exam for the first time and how many of them took the DAT more than once. And so it has stayed pretty consistent since I started tracking that information, and it looks like every year about 1/3 of people who get into dental school took the test took the DAT more than once. So I don't think that it looks bad, and clearly it certainly does not prohibit you from getting into dental school. A fairly decent percentage of dental students have done so. I include this. This is a survey that is performed at the end of the test to see how well we are doing in these various areas. It's really how well people think Prometric performed. And overall, people are pretty satisfied with getting their appointment date, how helpful the test center staff is, and how the test works. So, as I said before, when you get to that survey at the end of the test, don't think that that's information that we don't use. We really do review those surveys. The only thing I would say is there's a section for comments, and a lot of times when people experience problems the day that they test, they will write those in the survey comments. While we do review them, we generally do not get to them within a week after you took the test. So if there's something that you really want us to be aware of that you feel like will affect your score or affected your ability to take the test, you can certainly include it in the survey, but you also have to email testing problems at ADA so that we can take some sort of action on your behalf. This is just a breakdown of the different resources that we make available and sort of what we recommend. Like I said, if you have a pre-health advisor at your school, I certainly recommend that you seek their counsel on how to study for the test. Like me, they've interacted with a lot of people taking the test. They'll have some pretty good tips on how to do it. And that's the list of information that is on the DAT website. That is where the practice test that I discussed earlier is housed. It's under test preparation. It's also where the testing accommodations request form is, as well as all other necessary information. And that is the information below that Prometric offers. They have their own frequently asked questions. The practice test is actually administered through Prometric, so you can find a link to it on our website, or you can find a link to it on their website. They also have the tutorial and pretty helpful breakdown of what to expect on the day you actually take the test. So I am happy to answer any questions that you may have now. If you think of any that don't get answered here, you can contact the department in general, or you can contact me specifically with any questions that you may have.
Okay. It looks like we have actually quite a few questions. So once again, I'm going to change back over to my screen. So we have our emails, but we'll go from the top. And as I mentioned, we will do our best to try to get through some of these. Okay. There was a couple questions about whether they can get copies of the slides. So Nick, are you okay if we were to post these on the website with the recording, or? Yeah? Okay. All right. So we will post copies of the slides on the website at the same place that the recording. You kind of answered this with the multiple retakes, but this person is specifically saying, how do schools view the 4th DAT attempt, and what if you got an amazing score that time? I don't know if you have feedback on that.
It's going to depend on the school. Some schools choose to sort of mix and match test attempts. They will take your highest score from each of your test attempts and treat that as what is indicative of your ability. Some schools just look at the most recent, and that is generally what we would recommend. There's no requirements about it, but what we recommend is that a school look most closely at your most recent test attempt, because that is the clearest indicator of your current abilities. So I can't say for certain how a school would look at, how a specific school would look at it, but in general, it's just going to depend.
Someone's asking if it's possible to postpone a scheduled DAT exam, and if so, is there a fee for pushing that date back?
Yes. Yeah, so postponing is sort of the same in terms of terminology as rescheduling. So if you need to move your test back, there is a fee, and it goes up the closer you are to your test date. So within a week of the test, it's $100, and it goes down from there the further out from your test. But yes, unless there is an emergency situation that requires you to have to reschedule, you will have to pay to do so.
It says, after you applied to take the DAT, can you change the schools that you previously selected to send the scores to?
No, once you mark them on the application, you cannot make changes to that list. That's another reason that I would recommend you just select all of them. That way you're not stuck trying to add or change anyone later. So no, you cannot change once they're selected.
Okay, and so kind of related to this, someone said they already scheduled their DAT but haven't taken it yet, and they did not apply for all schools like you had recommended. So at this point, can they make that change, or are they charged $37 to add each school?
So they would have to pay $37 to add each school. I would say it may not be necessary for them to do that. If you request any schools to receive your scores, it is also sent to ADIA to be included on ADSAS. So if you are going to participate in ADSAS, if you're going to use the application service to apply to dental schools, you probably don't need to have us send your scores directly to the dental schools. Just sending it to even one of them will get it included on your ADSAS application, and then the schools will have access to it. Any school you apply to through the application service will have access to it that way. So you may want to check with the schools that you're applying to check whether they want the scores to come directly from us, or whether they will check for it and accept it on the ADSAS application. And if they'll accept it on ADSAS, then there's no need for you to add it as an additional request.
Okay, great. There's a couple questions about where they access those practice tests. Can you, again, give the URL for the website?
Sure. It's just ada.org/DAT, and the specific section is test preparation.
Okay, pretty easy. ada.org/DAT. Okay. Yep. This person is saying that they are scheduled to take a test at a Prometric test center. Who do they contact when there is a medical emergency?
So usually either of us would be fine. You can either get in touch with Prometric, or you can get in touch with us. I think my preference would probably be that they get in touch with us. It would be testingproblems@ada.org is the email, but they can always call us as well. Prometric can generally handle it themselves, but we are not the only tests that get administered at Prometric, and so their staff are answering questions and dealing with issues for all of the thousands of tests that they administer. So it may, just from a time perspective, be easier to get in touch with us and let us deal with Prometric. But you can go through, if it's an emergency, you can usually go through either Prometric or the ADA to get that result.
Okay, great. is it possible for somebody to get longer testing time than the usual, which is 4 hours and 30 minutes?
Yes, if there is if they have a documented disability and they request testing accommodations, it is possible to get extended time or various other accommodations. Like I said, if it's something that there's clear documentation that they need, like time and a half, or someone to read the test for them if you have trouble looking at a computer screen or reading off a computer screen, you may need somebody to read the test for you. If there's documentation to support you getting those testing accommodations and we are able to provide them, then we will do so.
So there are several different questions asking about how the DAT is scored, wanting to know how many questions they can get wrong to get a score of, let's say, a 20. Or, you know, what's the difference between like a 25 or a 28 in a certain section. So can you share a little bit more about the scoring?
I can, but there's not really a good specific answer to those questions. The answer is, unfortunately, it depends. As I was mentioning when I was going over the scoring slide, each test is calibrated, and so the number of questions you need to get correct on that specific version of the test to get a certain score is going to vary from test to test. Like I said, not all questions are the same difficulty. So if you are taking a test that has easier questions, then you'll need to get more answers, correct answers to get an average score or an above average score. Whereas if there are more difficult questions on a specific version of the test, you'll have to get less correct answers to get that same score. So that is also why I said that you should not put much stock in the scores that are given to you from any organization that offers practice tests, because there's really no way for them to have that be accurate, because without knowing, you know, our versions of the test and the different conversion scales for each version, there's no way for them to tell you how you would perform on an actual version of the DAT.
Okay. So a couple questions about the changes to the quantitative reasoning section. Someone said that they heard geometry was removed, and someone else is asking if there's trigonometry. So could you comment on what is covered in the QR section
Sure.
with the changes?
Sure. So that change was implemented in, I want to say, 2016. So yes, there are not questions dedicated to geometry or trigonometry on the dental admission test. That is not to say that there is no geometry or trigonometry on the test. There may be elements of geometry or trig in questions, but there are not questions dedicated to those concepts. So they were removed from the test specifications in the guide. So that is correct. There's not dedicated questions to geometry or trigonometry.
Someone is asking if there's a fee associated with having a tour of the Prometric Center.
Actually, yes. It's not exactly a tour, but it is sort of a practice check-in that you can do. I think it's $20 or $25. But yeah, in advance of your test date, you can go into the test center and they will walk you through the whole process of checking your IDs and having you check into the test center just like you will on test date. So that is something that is available. There is a small fee for it. I think it's $25.
Okay. And the ADA's practice test, so the full test you mentioned was $100. Someone's asking, can you take the practice test over and over, or is it $100 for just going through it once?
It is $100 for going through it once, because it is timed out to be like the test itself. So yeah, you would have to pay each time that you're going to go through it. Yeah, it's you pay each time, and it's not. There's only one version of the full practice test. For some of the individual modules, there's multiple versions. Like there's 3 different versions of the perceptual ability that you can take, but the full practice test would be the same every time that you went through it.
Great. And as far as when they can do the practice tests, they want to know at any time, or is there a certain time that that's available?
No, they can do it at any time. I don't believe you even need to have a dent pen to take the practice test. So yeah, you can go through that at any time.
Okay. And so this is related to people that have a disability. So if you have a disability and you disclose it to have the test split up, will the schools be able to see that you had accommodations made and dismiss you because of that?
No. So we are really stringent about the score reporting. It would actually be in violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act for us to report that someone had taken the test with accommodations. So that does not appear on your scores. We do not indicate that anywhere. We've actually had some people get a little bit frustrated with us because our rules around this are strict to the point where if you are taking a different test in the future and they want proof that you took our test with accommodations, we will not provide that after the fact. So no, we do not tell anyone under any circumstances that a test was taken with accommodation.
Great. I know you covered this early in the presentation, but maybe just if you can highlight again how long it takes to get the dent pin, and then how long it takes for the test scores to be sent to the dental schools.
Sure. So the dent pin you should be able to get automatically. The only circumstances under which I can think of that you would not get your dent pin automatically is if you try to use an email that is the same as an email that we already have a dent pin for. I think that's the only thing that stops you from being able to register. So you should be able to do it immediately as soon as you submit all of the information that it asks for. You should get one right away. And then usually it can take up to 4 weeks from the time you test for the official scores to be released. Generally, it happens faster than that. I'd say between 2 to 3, but you should always allow at least 4 weeks for your scores to get wherever it is that they need to go.
Okay. Someone is asking the percentage of applicants who retake the test, and I believe you said 1 in 3, at least, who are accepted into dental school.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Is it a disadvantage to take the DAT later in the application cycle? For example, if they take it in July, what would the repercussions be?
So from our perspective, there are no repercussions to testing later in the summer as compared to earlier. That's not going to affect your scores. I have gotten this question a couple times, whether it's harder to get a higher score later in the summer. It is not. The test is not really curved in that way in any given year. Like the people who test in June, that doesn't affect the scores for the people who test in July and August. It takes a lot longer than that for any sort of scoring adjustments that we would be making. The only disadvantage would be timing. If you have deadlines coming up that you can't meet. I should also say it takes us about 4 weeks to release scores, or it can take up to 4 weeks, but then it generally takes a DIA about a week after we send scores to them to get it put on the ATSAS application. So you probably want to test 4 or 5 weeks in advance of when the scores need to be on your ATSAS application. But from the ADA's perspective, that would be the only disadvantage of testing later in the year, is if you're coming up against deadlines. It's not going to affect your score at all.
Great. Someone's asking, are we able to mark questions from bio and orgo and go back and forth, or once we're done with bio, we wouldn't be able to go back?
So as long as you're within the survey of natural sciences, so the bio, the organic chem, and the gen chem, as long as you're within that section, you can mark questions and go back. It's not separated into 3 different units. It's all the survey of the natural sciences. So you can go back and review questions as long as you're still in that section. It's not until you move on until the perceptual ability that you would no longer be able to go back to any of the science questions in the 3 sections.
Okay. During the breaks that are scheduled during the exam, can they access the locker to get snacks, and can they use their phone during those scheduled breaks?
Yeah, during the 30-minute break between the perceptual ability and quantitative reading comprehension, yes, you can access your locker. You can leave the test center. You can use your cell phone. You can look at notes. You can look at textbooks. You can do whatever you would like. The easiest way to think about it is if there is test content on the screen, then you cannot access your locker. You cannot access your cell phone. But during a break, when you cannot possibly access questions and change answers and things like that, you can check your cell phone or look at notes, do whatever you want to do.
Okay. So you mentioned that you have the option to have your exam audited. Someone's asking, could an audit lower your test score?
Yeah, theoretically, I mean, it's as likely that it would lower someone's score as raise it. But as I said, in my time with the ADA, an audit has not changed someone's score on the computerized test, which is, again, not to say that it wouldn't change yours. It just has not changed anyone else's. But yeah, it's just as likely, I suppose, that it would lower a score as raise it.
Okay. Is an unofficial score provided to you the day you take the test before you leave the test center?
Yeah, though, since I did bring up the accommodations, I suppose I should mention it here. Yes, when you take the test, you get the unofficial scores. As soon as the test is completed, you can see how you performed, and then you get a printout at the test center, unless you get accommodations to test over 2 days. You only get the unofficial score report if you test all in one day. Essentially, if you test over 2 days, the results from your first day are no longer there. They've already been transmitted over to us, and they're not being held by the test center any longer, so they cannot provide a full set of unofficial scores. But as long as you test all in one day, yes, you get an unofficial score printout as soon as the test is in.
Okay. Is scratch paper available during this?
Yeah, it's not paper. It is a laminated sheet, and you are given a marker. You're given 2 laminated sheets, and then if you fill them up, you can raise your hand, and they will swap out the sheets that you got. You cannot make notes on them before the test or during any of your breaks. We've had people do that in the past where there's a lot of stuff that they've been studying that they want to make sure they remember, and so they quickly jot it all down during the tutorial or during one of the breaks, and that is actually against the rules. You can only be taking notes or making notes on those boards while you are in one of the testing sections. But yes, there are 2 sort of sheets of paper that are provided.
So there's several questions about how many weeks they should plan to study for the DAT, and I think people know it kind of depends on the individual, but they're kind of looking for the average. And I believe you said 8 to 10 weeks is really the average.
Yeah, 8 to 12, I would say. So I guess the average is about 10. I've heard different things from different people. I did one of these webinars with someone who had taken the test and performed pretty well, and they said they actually gave themselves 12 full weeks and treated it like a full-time job where they studied 6 or 7 hours a day in advance of their their test, but I would say 10 is good to use as an average.
And so just for everyone to know, as a resource, ASDA publishes a blog called Mouthing Off, and the post that is coming out, I believe it is tomorrow, is written by a few different students who shared their study schedule. So one student took the whole summer and just sort of immersed herself 8 hours a day. Another student did it for a longer period of time because she was still in class and she had a job, and so she kind of had to work around it. So I would suggest you read that post just to get an idea, because obviously, you know, your life is going to determine how you can study, whether you have the time to do it 8 hours a day or you have school or a job or other things that you're, you know, other commitments. Let's see. So if someone is a no-show, does that show up on your record that goes to dental schools?
No, the only thing that gets reported to the dental schools is the actual scores for the test. We would have a record that there was an appointment that someone did not show up for, but no, that's not reported to the application service or to the dental schools.
Okay. There's a couple of questions about the 6 month window. So someone's asking, can you extend it? Someone else said their email stated they only have 5 months, not 6 months to test. So maybe if you can comment on that 6 month window a little bit.
Sure. So if someone in the webinar has an eligibility email that only gave them 5 months, that was likely a glitch. I'm not sure exactly how that would happen, but certainly reply to the email and indicate the problem, or just email datexam@ada.org and we would have a look. It is theoretically possible to get an extension to the 6 month window, but that is not granted arbitrarily. You can't get it just by asking. There have to be extenuating circumstances. Sort of the criteria that we look at are, were the circumstances unforeseen, and do we agree that you could not reasonably have been expected to take the test within your 6 months? So if you come to us and it's 4.5 months after you applied for the test and you say, I'm really busy with school, can I get an extension? That's going to be denied. You knew that you were going to have school, so that is not unforeseen. You know, an extreme example would be, you know, say someone was in a coma for the last 2 months of their eligibility. They would certainly get an extension. That would certainly qualify as unforeseen and extenuating circumstances.
So it looks like we have time for just one last question. So there are a couple people who are asking about the right timing to take the DAT. Some are sophomores and they have, you know, some of the coursework. Do you have any data on what year in school is the majority of students are that take the DAT, or do you have any advice on what you think is the best time frame?
I don't have, well, we do have information on when people take the test, and it's fairly evenly split between people in their sophomore year and people in their junior year. That doesn't really have as much to do with how people perform on the test from what we have seen as whether or not they've taken organic chemistry. We find a lot of people don't take organic chemistry until their junior year, and so we find that a lot of times people will take the test in their junior year before they've taken organic chemistry, and then they end up having to retake the test because they didn't like the score they got in that section, and then got a lower science score because of it. So I would say concentrate more on the courses you've taken than where you are in college. If you've taken all of the courses that are covered on the test by your sophomore year, then by all means you should be prepared to sit for the DAT. But if you haven't, I think you should really think hard about how prepared you are for the sections that you haven't taken courses in.
All right, thank you. So I know there were some questions that we weren't able to get to. So again, here are our emails. Nick gave the website. So again, ada.org/DAT. I think a lot of the questions that were asked as far as fees and things like that would be covered on that site. So for those of you who are, really in the midst of preparing for the DAT, because this is DAT week for ASDA, we have 2 more webinars this week, and they're a little bit different. So tonight's webinar was to help you with sort of general information, registration, some of the process for the exam. The webinars that are tomorrow night and Thursday night are more specific to these certain sections. So tomorrow night we'll focus on the PAT, and Thursday night we'll focus on the science and quantitative reasoning. And so those will be presented by students who have taken the exam, and they will provide some study tips, some ways to approach the questions, and then we'll also do some live mock questions that you'll get a chance to try to answer. So the website there, if you're interested in registering for those. So we also have a contest going this week on our Instagram that every day we post a theme related to the DAT. So today was mentor, and so you can post a picture, and if your photo is selected, we have some free DAT study tools that we are giving away each day. So there's our handle at ASDA_predental. We also have on our Facebook page, so ASDA Predental, every day we are posting a sample DAT question, and for everybody who gets the question correct, you again are entered into a raffle for some DAT study resources. Some of those resources are the ADA practice tests that Nicholas had talked about. We have a few of those to raffle off. So if you want to check out our Facebook page, every day this week there will be a different question for you to answer. And then lastly, I saw that there were a few questions about, is it beneficial to join ASDA, depending on where you're at in the cycle. Really, ASDA, the resources that we offer for predentals cover the whole timeline. So we have a lot of information on the application itself, on the DAT, on interviewing, writing personal statements. We offer discounts on a few different DAT study tools. One of the best benefits is a guide that we produce called Getting into Dental School, and it has a listing of each of the 66 dental schools and all of their requirements, so that you can kind of determine which school is right for you. The other thing is that we host many different webinars like we did tonight on various topics. So not just the DAT, but again, also on interviewing, on personal statements, on how to choose a school, and even on issues in dentistry, so that when you get to those interviews, you have some knowledge of what is going on in the profession. So if it's something you're interested in, asdanet.org is our website, so /predental will give you sort of a view of some of the resources that I spoke about, some of the benefits of ASDA. And as part of DAT Week, we are doing an incentive that for anybody who joins ASDA this week, you will be entered into a raffle for a free 90-day DAT Bootcamp subscription. And also we're giving away a Crack the DAT Pro package. So again, if you join this week, you're entered into that raffle. All right, that concludes our webinar. So I really want to thank Nicholas Husong from the ADA. That was extremely valuable, all of the information that you provided. We appreciate you spending your time with us. As I mentioned at the beginning, this recording will go on our website, and also will be an email will be sent out to everybody that registered. At the end of the week, you will also get just a brief survey about the webinar, and we really appreciate if you would fill that out. That helps us make improvements so that when we hold these types of webinars, we make sure that you're getting what you need from it. So again, I want to thank everyone for attending and hope everyone has a good night. Thank you.
Thank you.